Chris Hensley is a registered representative of Cambridge Investment Research, Inc., a broker-dealer member of FINRA SIPC, investment advisor representative of Cambridge Investment Research Advisors, Inc., a registered investment advisor. Cambridge and Houston First Financial Group are not affiliated.
Good morning, everybody. You're listening to Money Matters. I'm Chris Hensley. We have a great show lined up for you today. On today's topic, I was thinking about this. I've been in the industry for about 20 years or so, and when I started reaching out to workplace education, one of the things that I did is I set an alert on Google to let me know whenever there were any Houston layoffs. Now, that was many years ago, and I set that Google alert, and this is 2008, 2009, and once the economy recovered, I didn't get too many of the alerts, kind of forgot that I even had it on there. Lo and behold, this is one of the ways to kind of look at the economy to see, how things are going. I've started to get more of those layoff Google alert notices for I use the term Houston layoffs, and it kind of lets me know. Our guest today, Stephen Mitchell-Sack, is the author of the book Fired. And so this book, it talks about protecting your rights and fighting back if you're terminated, laid off, downsized, restructured, forced to resign or quit. Stephen, thank you so much for joining us today.
Chris, it's really a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, you are a labor and an employment attorney, and you're the best-selling author of 20 law books. You've spent the last 41 years with legal career defending people who have been exploited in the workplace. So this is kind of your area. This is where you live. Let's start off with, why did you write Fired?
Well, as a labor and employment lawyer, most of my work, Chris, involves representing terminated executives and employees whose rights have been violated, either in discrimination or overtime. They're owed hour and wage litigation, or certainly they're denied year-end benefits like a large bonus, pension, profit-sharing plan, vested stock, that kind of thing. And that's what I do. More of my time, and I've been, as you said, doing this for 42 years. I've represented thousands and thousands of terminated, people. Most of my time is just to negotiate a better severance package. And I wanted to leave a legacy. I am 68 and a half, I'm still working, but I wanted to leave a legacy so that the American public would have a tool to figure out when they were being exploited and what they could do about it.
I love it. I love it. Stephen, one of the areas that I work with is our higher education. So that's university professors here, really across the state of Texas. And I want to say, and over the last 20 years, I saw maybe a handful of voluntary separation packages where people will hire me to kind of review what they're offering to take early retirement. In the last 2 years since COVID, and we saw record numbers of cuts really across the board from these schools, I've done so many of these voluntary separations where they're given like package and that sort of stuff. One of the things that you write about is being fired because of your age, and that kind of, that made me kind of think on that or focus. And what can you tell us about being fired because of your age?
Well, it's difficult to prove an age discrimination case unless you have smoking gun evidence, as they say. So what I like to find is comments made to a plaintiff or a potential plaintiff like, hey, Jim, you're not working your territory like you used to. We're looking for some new blood around here, or it's pretty obvious that they're asking you to train a 37-year-old, you're 65, and they want you to train a 37-year-old replacement, or they have a history of terminating older executives and lining them up, replacing them with younger executives under 40, then you may have a case. And there are out there, but mostly, if you are fired and you're in your mid-60s, et cetera, or, over, 55, 60 in that range, What you want to do is they usually will offer you a package, like you said. Virtually all companies these days who are laying off executives who have not done anything wrong, like we're not talking about that you were fired for punching someone out or stealing, right? That you were terminated through no fault of your own. Suddenly, the company gave you this lame defense of, oh, a restructuring or, a job elimination, and it's not true, and you're in your 60s, and they give you an offer. Let's say you've been at the company for 25 years, and they give you 1 week per year, or they give you 26 weeks. Well, very easily you can get that up to maybe a year. You can double that offer just by asking. So what I really want our listeners to know is that every firing is negotiable, especially if you're an executive, and especially if you've been in a company for a long time and you're being terminated through no fault of your own.
So that's very important. Some of the things you just mentioned is if it's actually a case of age discrimination, some of the things you're looking about is language, actually hearing them say some of that, or a track record of, laying people off at that age. But then you talked about, these packages that people get, and that everything can be negotiable. So maybe not just taking the first thing that you get. There's a lot of different things that come to mind. I know when people have reached out to me, they're looking at their retirement plans and pensions, retiree health insurance, even, how long they've paid into Social Security. All that stuff comes into play. I know one of the things you talk about is retirement plans and kind of forced retirement. What are some of the things people should be thinking about when it comes to that?
Well, being forced to retire in certain situations is illegal. So, if you're being pressured to retire, you might want to speak with a knowledgeable labor and employment lawyer. You said something before that's so true. What we're looking at is, specific statements made to somebody or empirical evidence, statistics that would demonstrate a company's discriminatory bias to lay someone off because of their age. An older worker, especially someone in their mid-60s or older, even though jobs may be plentiful in the United States, people aren't hiring older workers anymore, regardless. Even if you're like Albert Einstein, they're just not. And what I try to do is, if this may be your last rodeo, so to speak, we want to make sure that the company offers you a better package. And just like you said, if they, are threatening or pressuring you to retire, well, you gotta make it worth your while to retire. You just shouldn't fall in line and do what they say. So it's very important, especially if you're close to an accelerated vested pension or profit sharing plan. If you're about to get huge stock options that are vesting and they want to terminate you or make you retire before, those are things you should question the timing of the firing. And you definitely want to get the benefit, a year-end bonus, and you definitely want to get the benefit of that regardless of whether or not you retire.
Super important. The thing, you just mentioned the retirement plan, the pension, the stock options, but making sure that it's worth your time to retire early. I know a lot of these companies, when they decide to do layoffs, they're going for salary heavy, so they usually are looking for and it just happens to be age is a factor there, right? If you've been there for 40 years and you're on the highest pay scale, they're looking to kind of chop in that direction. But we're talking about people that may be, a year or two away from being vested in their retirement plans, and so you've put money into that, or you've been, vesting into that pension, your health care, those stock options, things that you might be leaving on the table, even sometimes by 6 months. Sorry you didn't make that vesting. Those are super important things to think about.
Baby. That's correct. You are absolutely right. And what we want to empower our listeners to understand is that if you don't accept the first offer, they expect you to just bow your head and shuffle your feet out the door. But like you said, you worked a long time and you're 6 months shy of something that's about to vest. Don't accept the company's action. You need to negotiate. You need to, basically stand up for yourself. And by doing that, more likely than not, you're going to improve the final deal, Chris.
I love it. I love it. So that's super important. We're going to pivot a little bit because your book Fired, this is just one area. I'm super interested in this area. And I guess that's why I'm asking here, but there's so many different things that you go into. You've got the templates there for people. But you also talk about things like gender discrimination or sexual harassment in the workplace. What can you tell us about this?
Well, women fortunately have rights, and they're fighting back. And as a result of the Me Too movement, a lot more women are able now to enunciate, or they feel empowered to complain about, a workplace sexual harassment or working in an intimidating, hostile work environment, and they're winning. Women also, I've had a lot of cases where there's new equal pay laws, where women are now legally obligated to receive the same compensation and salary that similarly situated male colleagues are getting, So the laws have changed, and the pendulum has swung back to women. I, about 7 years ago, was fortunate to represent 3 pregnant women who complained that when they became pregnant, all of them, within a period of 6 months, coincidentally, were all fired. And I brought an action in New York, in the Bronx. I had a jury trial, and I won a $6.2 million jury verdict. I kid you not, I mean, this is what is happening in the world these days. People have rights, and that's why I wrote this book, to give back, to give people practical, simple strategies, tips, guidance, and suggestions with forms, like you said, with checklists, so that anybody can understand possibly when their rights are being violated and how to fight back.
I love it. I love it. That is, people when they're hiring, they're not going to come out and say it, but if they know you're pregnant, that's one of those things. And so that coming up, and that you've done a case like this, and that's actually a chapter in the book where you talk about pregnancy discrimination. So that's an important thing to talk about. There another section of the book you talk about. We're here in Texas, and I know Texas is an at-will employer. You go into, if you're fired for attending jury duty, or for doing the right thing, being a corporate responsibility there, and being a whistleblower, even some of these things come up. What can you tell us about that?
Great question. So, we hear that, I work in a right to work state, which means I have no rights. Nothing could be further from the truth. That means that, generally speaking, you can be fired suddenly without warning, notice, or cause, and that you have no expectation of job security. However, you still, in an at-will right-to-work state, can contest the firing on the basis of discrimination, breach of contract. Suppose you worked a long time and you earned a commission, a large commission, and the company fires you right before the customer is paying the $5 million, fee, for the deal, right? Which you would have gotten paid on. Well, just because you work in a right-to-work state and the company is firing you doesn't give them the right to steal the commissions that you worked so hard for because you were the procuring, soliciting cause. By the way, I once won a case in Beaumont, Texas. It was incredible. It was a $3.9 million jury verdict in Beaumont. I worked with a local firm down there. Generally speaking, the case involved a commissioned sales rep who was promised, if he was ever terminated not for cause, that he would receive a sum of money equal to the increased territory, a market share that he had built up. And he had built up this territory from nothing to millions of dollars a year in orders, right? And they terminated him suddenly. And he alleged that promise, and the jury agreed. And he wound up winning a huge amount of money. So we did that in Texas. Yes, it's right to work state, but if you're owed money or you have a benefit that you're expecting, that will not allow the company to not pay you what you're entitled to.
I love it. I love it. Sales organizations are famous for that. That's one of the reasons I'm independent is because, I've gone that route and, you'll have companies that'll set one structure in place and then 6 months later change it up. I think that's a story across the board for, sales people. So to
That's
hear
the
some
life of a salesman. But by the
exactly.
way, I got involved in this business 40 years ago through my father of blessed memory. He was a commission salesman, and he would build up a territory, and then they'd fire him and convert his accounts into house accounts, or they would suddenly, oh, congratulations, Mr. Sack, you just brought in $1 million order. Oh, by the way, for such a large order, we're only paying you 2% commission, not 7% that you thought you were getting. Right? And my
Exactly.
father
Yeah.
took a stand and he sued a couple of companies. They actually called him Sue 'em Sack. And as a result of that, I worked on those cases when I was in law school. We're talking in the 70s. I went to Boston College Law School. I worked on his cases, and I realized that my father was onto something, that, people should assert themselves when they've been fired or when they disagree with a company's unlawful or unfair action. And then as a result of that, as we talked about, I've represented over 15,000 terminated executives, Chris, and more than 80% of the time when I represent them, I will get them a better deal. And I, figured out why. Companies are fearful of lawyers and litigation. They don't want bad publicity, especially a lawyer like myself who's won, some very high profile multi-million-dollar jury verdicts. You just Google me and you know who I am and what I've done. And so the bottom line is they don't want to tangle, especially if they may do something legal, but it may be unfair and it may be unjust. And I don't think they want the reputation of getting, doing the wrong thing for their employees and executives. They don't like that. So what they'll do is they'll throw me some extra money. I mean, I'm not saying every case I get $100,000 more for someone. I may get them a couple of more weeks severance, which is worth $5,000, $10,000. I may get them, and this is an easy one. All your listeners should do this. When they're fired, they should negotiate a better COBRA package. See, under the law, you have the right to continue your medical coverage for you and your family, but it's normally at your expense. Companies know, how are you going to pay the $2,000 a month premium when you don't have a job, right? So the bottom line is that's an easy one to ask for, and usually companies will add a couple of months of paid COBRA. Then we're talking about outplacement assistance. We're talking about a favorable letter of reference. Sometimes when companies fire my clients, suddenly I ask for notice pay, and I'm able to get a couple of more weeks for them of notice pay. Listen, whatever you get, that's more than you started, you're better off,
I love it. I love it. There's a reason they call it Cobra because it stinks. People don't realize when they're switching from the traditional employer-sponsored health insurance that they're picking up a good bit of the premium, or even 100% of it on the backside. And so you'll see, your premiums like triple. So, bringing that into what you call negotiating the best severance package after you get fired is super important. I think that's a great tip. And then the other thing that you mentioned was paid assistance,
outplacement. It's called outplacement
yeah.
assistance, and many companies are willing to provide that, especially to their senior executives when they're laid off. But then, we go back to, how I negotiate is I throw 20 darts on a wall. If 5 stick, I'm ahead of the game. The real big ones are, I ask for notice pay. I try to get 1 month per year of severance. So if they offer you a week per year, you probably can improve it. If you're fired right before an expected year-end bonus and you've been getting bonuses regularly, don't allow them to cut you off of that bonus. You got to get it, especially if you're fired, like in the 11th or 12th month, or certainly if you're fired after the year vested, but before it's paid. Some companies have policies that say, we only pay a bonus if you're on the payroll the day the bonus is paid. Yeah, but guess what? You fired me to deprive me of that bonus. But for the firing, I would have gotten my bonus. So I need it. I'm entitled to it. I worked for it, and I want it. And that's the kind of strategy that you have to assert.
I love it because the tips that you just gave us are almost like a guardrail of things that people should have on that radar. And I think a lot of people, when they get fired, they're just disheartened. They're just it's kind of like a punch in the gut, right? And so they may just take any old thing that just take it at face value. So introducing the idea that it's negotiable, and then on the other end where you're able to get a lot of these concessions made and I'm sure people haven't even thought about that. So that's fantastic. It puts people into a good position to really, like you said, stand up for themselves. And in fact, the third chapter in the book you call Fighting Back. But this talks a little bit about how to resign from your job properly and how to maximize unemployment benefits. I found that a lot of times people aren't even, they haven't had to think about it in the past. It's new to them, and they're not even aware of kind of some of the best practices and things they need to do. What can you tell us about these unemployment benefits?
All right. So first of all, resigning is not a good idea. When you resign from a job, you're waiving expected benefits, including most times unemployment. So you want to make the company fire you. I know it sounds counterproductive, but it's not. In this day and age, saying I was terminated, it means nothing. 30, 40 years ago, it meant a lot. By the way, I stumbled upon this specialty because I myself was fired from my first job back in 1980 in New York. And I was fired suddenly and kind of cruelly. And I was told to get out, and I was given 2 weeks severance. And I accepted that blindly, like you said. And most people, they'll be fired suddenly and they're shocked. So they'll just bow their head and shuffle their feet out the door. So I said to myself, wait a minute. And I went back in and I asked her for more money, the owner, and I got another week. No big deal. But something in my head said, you know what? There's something here. And then I wrote a book. I had written a book in law school called The Salesperson's Legal Guide that was published by Prentice Hall. And then I wrote another book called Don't Get Taken, How to Protect Your Money, Family, and Job. Most of the interviews only cared about jobs. And I said to myself, why is that? It seems pretty, interesting. And then I was lucky enough, I was written up in the Wall Street Journal in '84 because I represented a bunch of middle managers who were terminated, and someone told the Wall Street Journal that I was able to get a bigger package for them. And an article was written about me, and then I started representing Wall Street people, hedge fund people, bankers, financial people, and my career took off. And all the strategies that I developed and learned are now, in this book. And when I tell people not to resign, I mean it. Make the company fire you. You can always go in there and say, look, I'm not happy. Let's work out a package. Separate me, that I want to get unemployment. If you resign, per your question, you're probably forfeiting unemployment. Also, unemployment is something that everyone is entitled to. And as long as you can prove that you weren't fired for gross misconduct, even if you were fired for poor performance, that will not rise to the level of gross misconduct, which will not enable you to get unemployment. So in the book, there's a chapter, as you know, on how to get unemployment benefits, how to win a case, because you're going to go before an administrative law judge. It's something that I wanted people to learn about because, frankly, it's not that difficult to win a case in unemployment.
I love it. I love it. This is really, really good information. The book Fire, the author, Stephen Mitchell Sachs. Stephen, we're right here bumping towards the end of the half hour. What would you like to share with listeners that I have forgot to ask you?
Basically, what would you negotiate? How would you negotiate? I would appeal to corporate decency and fair play. Don't threaten litigation in the beginning. Say something like, I have 2 kids in college. I have an expensive home in Texas. My wife is ill, and this termination is putting me on the road to financial ruin. I've made you millions of dollars, or I saved you millions of dollars. You got to do better, and you probably will. If people want an answer, Chris, they can call me on the phone. Did I give my number?
You did not. If you could give us that information, that'd be great.
Can I give it? Yes, thank you. And I want people to know I'm not charging. I don't need business. If people have a question and they want to reach out to me, my 24/7 business line is 917-371-8000. That's 917-371-8000. Don't be surprised if I answer the phone myself. If people want to purchase the book and they can't find it, they can go to the website, www.legalstratpub.com. If they want to send me an email about anything, send it to Stephen Sack, A-T-T-Y, abbreviated for attorney, at hotmail.com. That's Stephen Sack, A-T-T-Y, at hotmail.com. My homepage is stephensack.com or theemployeeslawyer.com. One more time, you want to reach me, 917-371-8000.
And if you are listening to the show and you're driving and you don't have a pen with you, don't worry. We're going to have that on the podcast notes as well. So, Stephen, thank you so much for joining us today. Have a good rest of the day there.
All the best. Thanks, for inviting me. Good luck to all our listeners. Fight back. Don't let companies take advantage of you. All the best, Chris.